gender discrimination in the workplace. One of the biggest issues that we face is that we actually see a lot of gender discrimination in the workplace. Things that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is the gender discrimination and also the sex discrimination, as well as the difference between victims of sex and gender discrimination and what laws protect these victims. So let's go ahead and head over to point one. So what is gender or sex discrimination? What we can go ahead and differentiate between both of them is that the discrimination itself is treating individuals differently and in their employment because of individual is a man or a woman. This means that it's rejecting for employee, firing the employee, or otherwise harming the employee on the environment itself. What we defined as sex, or what social scientists have actually defined as sex, is the biological or anatomically identification that they have since they're born. What we define as gender, it's actually the characteristics that they've usually associated with, or how they identify themselves. If we discriminate with either or, this actually means that this is actually illegal. So one of the how women get discriminated, women are actually the ones that face this issue the most, just because they've to go back to medieval times where they've been discriminated since the beginning before they made the Equal Treatment Act. This can mean when they're hiring or firing someone, meaning that they can actually reject a woman when she's applying for a job even though she has the experience, but the hiring management have actually decided to go with a man with less experience just because they've preferred hiring men. So the benefits of this is that when it comes to pay, we can actually define this as a woman that has been hard worker in their company for a couple of years, and they have actually recently hired a male, and they've paid him more. So we can actually consider this as discrimination when it comes to pay. The last thing that we see, it's also benefits. Let's say, for example, a woman is denied the policy cover for her spouse, even though the male does actually get coverage for the wives and the kids. This is actually as well considered discrimination. So how do we identify the difference between the victims? Meaning that how do we know when someone is suffering from gender identification discrimination? Transgender people are usually people who are born with the opposite sex that they identify themselves with. We usually call them transgender. They face serious discrimination just because a lot of the people do hold those traditional sex stereotypes, and they have to confront with that, and usually that's what makes them feel so uncomfortable. When it comes to the law that it is covered under them, once they pass the civil law, the Civil Rights Act law of 1964, Congress did not intend to protect transgender people, only sex discrimination. That's what they meant. A couple of years back, they've actually come back and they've reviewed the law. They evaluated the law so it covers the making, the sex, and the gender identification both equally. So making and discrimination for either of them, it's actually illegal at this point. What we're going to go ahead and cover next is actually going to be who is covered by the law. This means that the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects individuals from the discrimination based upon sex. A quote that we got from the Civil Rights Act, it's to tell or refuse to hire or discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his or her compensation, terms of privileges on employment because of such individual sex. This is what we consider discrimination according to the Civil Rights Act. It does protect individuals based upon sex and now gender, meaning that they cannot discriminate individuals when they're hiring and other times when they're also given promotions, raises, or any other job opportunities, which actually gives us to a second quote for the Civil Rights Act, which is to limit, segregate, or classify employees or applicants for employment in any way which could deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment opportunities or otherwise affect the individual that is as an individual because of such individual's sex. Mainly, how do we cover this law? Who specifically is covered with this law? This would actually go back to private employees, state and local governments, as well as educational institutions that employ 15 or more people. meaning that when it comes to pay, the law against discrimination and compensation cover all forms of compensation, including salary, overtime pay, bonuses, stock options, profit sharing, and bonus plans. The insurance, vacation, and holiday pay, cleaning or gasoline allowances, hotel accommodations, reimbursement for travel expenses, and other benefits. The Equal Pay Act requires both men and women to be given an equal pay for equal work in the same establishment. The way the EPA works is actually going to be how we can go ahead and file a discrimination charge. Would actually be it doesn't have to be the same job title as long as it is the same conditions that they have to work on, meaning that it does determine the same content of the job. That's what it's going to determine the equality of the job itself. They do not have to work in the same establishment as a position, as a higher paid position. This can be in another state or in another location, as well as the EPA does not require any proof of intent to discriminate on the basis of sex of intent. What they do take in consideration are skills, are the skills which is actually the experience and ability of the or the education that they need, as long as it's the same effort, which would actually go back to the amount of physical or mental execution that they need, and responsibilities such as the degree of accountability required, the working conditions, which separates into things: the physical surroundings and the hazards themselves. To fix this problem, they should not lower the wages of anyone else to equalize the problem. So, in conclusion, the victims who are rejected for employment, fired, or harmed in any way is what we call discrimination itself. The sex and gender are different terms. We do know that sex is actually something that they're biologically identified with, and gender is something that they actually do feel that they belong part of, and not necessarily what they're biologically determined with. Women usually are the biggest force that what they face the discrimination itself. There is a difference between sex and gender. We should take that in count as well every time that we're hiring or are thinking about what type of discrimination we're going to give to people, since both of them are actually illegal. And we do have a law that covers them. We have the Title VII, and we have Equal Pay Act that covers the employment themselves. And this actually does conclude my presentation.